Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is celebrating the birthday of a loved one today, as World of Warcraft turns 15.
Oh, I couldn't. I was like, oh, it's 15. What? But she's 17 today. So why would he?
Happy Quinceañera, World of Warcraft. El Mundo del Warcraft. I don't know.
Oh my goodness. Good. That was good. I give you that one. Yes. Yep. Happy birthday, Warcraft, and my daughter, and our guest. Oh my goodness. Yes. Thank you. Well, yeah. We have a wonderful guest on today, and happy to introduce Brad Furminger. So Brad started in games in 1998 for Silicon Knights and worked there until 2008 as lead designer. Sounds like he maybe wore a few other hats as well that he can tell us about. And he worked on games like Eternal Darkness, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, and Two Human, including an unannounced project as well, it sounds like. He then went on to Bedlam Games until 2011 and worked on Dungeons & Dragons Daggerdale. And then from 2012 to present, Brad has made his jump into academia as well and works as a game development professor at George Brown College, as well as the Toronto Film School, working with both undergraduate and postgraduate students. And he is also a consultant on game design and a freelancer. So welcome so much, Brad. And by the way, for the audience, it is Brad's birthday today that we are recording this on a Saturday. And so thank you, Brad, for coming on your birthday.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I was kind of surprised at thinking that I was such a loved one already in Brett's intro there until I realized he was speaking about somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, where is he going with this? Who's the loved one in this situation? But, he kind of got it right. My infatuation with Warcraft. Well, yeah, thanks. I know it's taken time out of your birthday, so hopefully your family or whomever is okay with that.
Oh, yeah, they're quite supportive, and I think they're probably happy to have me squirreled away somewhere out of their way for an hour or so.
Okay, good. Well, one of the things that we usually try to do that you may or may not know from our interviews is we just kind of like to break the ice with talking about how you got into the industry specifically and game design. So what was that? Sounds like you were kind of working in game retail as I did and many of us did before that. But what was your entry into games?
Yeah, it was very much a right place, right time kind of moment. I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and like you say, I was working in games retail, and the city I lived and worked in was St. Catharines, Ontario, which was where Silicon Knights was based. And being in a game store in a city with game developers, it's almost impossible not to cross paths. Mm-hmm. So the guys would regularly come in, and Dennis Dyack, who was the president of Silicon Knights, would just get into conversations. And conversations started with the typical, "Hey, Brad, what's new in today?" And then eventually started progressing into, "Hey, Brad, what's good today?" And what's selling? Why isn't this one doing as well as you'd expect? And just kind of getting into that discussion of games on a deeper level than just a kind of vendor-client relationship. And from there, I had my first interview would have been at the Legacy of Kain, the Blood Omen launch party. I got invited to that.
It was actually at the party.
Yeah, it was. Got invited to the party, and it was a really fine shindig, and just kind of impromptu got pulled aside and had a conversation. And then a little while after that, I went in for a more formal interview, and then literally got recruited or plucked out of the retail space to work on the other side of things, which is a little harder to do now.
Yeah.
Yeah, given how competitive it is and how many school programs are available now in game development, which, back in '98, I think I can remember maybe 2 schools that were on anyone's radar, and that would have been was at Full Sail,
Right.
which is still going, and probably Digipen.
Right.
But the last thing I was expecting was that, some studio was going to pop up in St. Catharines, and that was where I was going to end up. But it worked out quite well.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the unique things about Silicon Knights. It was in, such a specific place, and it was always intriguing to me that to be honest, that they were able to recruit, because it was so far away from other, and there wasn't it wasn't an Austin or a, British Columbia or something like that, Vancouver, where there was multiple studios. I don't believe, right, that Silicon Knights the only one there, or was the only one there?
We were the only one in St. Catharines. There was Sandbox Studios was nearby. And if memory serves correctly, Sandbox, I think, evolved into Digital Extremes.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize. That's true. Okay, they're both, that I can see them being closer. Okay. My geography up there is not great.
That's okay, neither.
So from there, like, talk about sort of getting into game design specifically, because you, and correct me if I'm wrong, if my intro had any of, sort of your initial titles incorrect or anything like that, but did you go directly into Eternal Darkness at that point and work as lead designer, or, how did the design aspect of your role, once you did get hired, how did that progress?
Well, that was kind of an interesting path, because I was recruited to be a designer on 2 Human back on the PlayStation 1.
Holy cow.
And
right. Of course.
Yeah, that's a storied tale in itself. A game that went through many iterations before it was finally released 10 years later. But I joined the Eternal Darkness team probably around the same time that the N64 version was being canceled and moving over towards the GameCube. And at the time, 2 Human was going through some shifts as well. We had just become a second-party studio with Nintendo, and Nintendo was interested in 2 Human as well. So we actually had a skeleton crew of, I'd say probably 5 people that were still working on 2 Human during Eternal Darkness development once we switched over to GameCube. But I came in and joined Ted Traver, who was the other lead designer on the project, and he laid a lot of the main groundwork. And I came in kind of as a juggler and as a kind of management through those changes that we were going through into the GameCube, and changes that came later on with the events of 9/11 made some changes which have been talked about by Dennis a couple times as well. So it was definitely a great collaborative effort. I loved the team I had there, and such a wide range of backgrounds, which I think was beneficial to where we were located. Is we didn't have a lot of designers on the team who were like experienced veterans, and the company took a real guild-like mentality of like being like almost like a teaching hospital, but on the game design side. And we had a lot of people from diverse backgrounds and diverse interests that just all shared the same passion for making games, and we were really able to learn from each other. And going into the studio, I didn't have a portfolio of design work to show. I hadn't designed any games. I hadn't done any mods. I hadn't built any levels in level editors. I just lived and breathed games since I was, a kid, and got my first Pong clone on a black and white TV in the basement. And it just, was something I continue to eat and breathe today.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the team makeup and the sort of unique situation and location and sort of people's backgrounds, because it was actually a topic that came up in our series. We did 4 episodes for Eternal Darkness and played through the game, and and I think specifically because of the main characters that you play as throughout the game were so diverse, and unfortunately, at the time, that wasn't as common as it should have been in game protagonists. And also the structure of the game lended itself really well to, to allow yourself to play as different avatars. So can you elaborate on that a little bit from your memory, and maybe as you're going through that, kind of also elaborate on what kinds of design stuff you did do if you're partnering with Ted, was it?
That's right.
Yeah, maybe kind of talk about some of the stuff, especially because, like you said, you're just getting into design yourself. I can imagine it being a bit overwhelming to jump right into, a full-scale project like this, especially second-party Nintendo, and kind of everyone learning together, which sounds really fascinating. And I love the teaching hospital, analogy. That seems very interesting to me as well, because that is very, that's very uncommon. But yeah, can you go into some of that stuff?
Yeah, it definitely was intimidating to start out. Actually, it was funny because I remember when I first joined in, I was thrilled. Like, this is a dream that I had. When I was in high school, I was like, I was playing Sierra games, right? Playing King's Quest and Space Quest and all that. And those are the games that made me want to get into games. And at some point in my career trajectory, I decided I didn't want to sit in front of a computer all day. So I started changing paths, and then here I am sitting in front of a computer that I'm going to be sitting in front of almost literally all day. But I was living the dream kind of thing. And the first couple of weeks were dreadful because here's a huge document, study it. Here's an in-house tool that we've made that's really clunky, and we've found some issues with it. So my first actual hands-on job was taking levels for 2 Human that had been built in our proprietary editor, and every asset was all dropped into basically one big space, and the game engine couldn't handle it. So we had to break up into smaller rooms. So I would drag an asset from one list to another and wait about 5 minutes for the list to refresh. And I did that like all day. And I remember going home and going, what have I gotten myself into? This is not the glamorous, exciting job I thought it would be. But then,
people rarely realize that game development often involves a lot of waiting around. And we talked with one of the Miller brothers from Myst, and he talked about, we had to watch. We could literally watch the scenes render. They took forever. Just to move around, you had to turn everything to wireframe so you could move the camera a little bit or whatever. I mean, it's just, it's often the glamour is often overstated for sure. Yeah,
that's one of the first stories I tell my students that are getting into game design is that, be prepared for a bit of tedium, because it's a great field to be in, but it's not always, sunshine and roses. But it was actually a few months after that where things really went crazy, and we had a little bit of turnover in the design team. One of our leads had left, and kind of left us in a bit of a bind where we had milestones to hit and not a lot of time and a lack of leadership. And that was where I was able to establish myself and earn the lead promotion, just from doing some insane amounts of crunch, which is far worse back then than we see now. I remember the 1 week, there were 2 of us working away trying to meet this milestone, and we spent about 23 hours a day in the office, and would go home for an hour to change clothes and shower as a courtesy to our coworkers. And through that 5-day span, I got total of 9 hours sleep, and it was like intense, but it was that war story that kind of defines whether or not this is what you want to do. And I remember questioning several times as my vision started getting blurry and I started feeling the exhaustion kick in. But I was like, no, this is still so thrilling and so exciting what I'm doing, that we pushed through and we made our milestone. We got our deliverables done. but the kind of punctuation mark on the week was when Dennis came in. He sat down and he played. And he goes, "Yeah, I don't like any of this. We're gonna throw all this out." And I was like, almost broke. And he said, "So take a couple days, come back in, and we'll take another look." So if it's true that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I felt like the Hulk after that, because that darn near broke both of us. But we said, "Hey, you know what? We didn't get fired, so it's a good day." And we came back and we pushed through. And I don't think I ever had a single week that was as bad as that. It was just perfect storm of bad timing. But that was when my rise up the ranks kind of started. And after that, the intimidation factor goes down a little bit when suddenly you have people looking to you for guidance, and you're like, well, I can't show any fear show through. People are depending on me, and I need to be able to depend on them. And the fear, the intimidation goes away quickly. Of course, once you start working with someone like Nintendo, it starts to creep back in a little bit, because they'd been doing what they'd been doing so well for so long. And
right.
But man, what a learning experience it was.
Yeah, that definitely is ripping the Band-Aid off for you, to have something like that kind of event happen so early. and yeah, it definitely tests you for sure. So were you focused on certain areas of design, like level design or system design, or were you? If there were only two of you, it sounds like you were probably doing pretty much a lot of stuff.
Yeah, at about the time I started at SK, I think I was the 32nd person in the studio. We were pretty small back then, and there would have been 5 of us in the design team, split between 2 projects. And eventually we grew bigger. But in the beginning, we didn't have separate level design departments, game design departments. We didn't even have a dedicated QA department. So design was responsible for all of it. And it was a little bit of trial by fire, but we learned so quickly on the job, and we had so many great people to learn from. Like Dennis's passion and creativity is incredible. And really, my career as a designer came from both his faith in me being able to do the job, as well as the things that I learned from him and from the other guys in the studio. And then, of course, working with Nintendo and Konami and Sega and some other companies, you just learn so much from so many people, especially when like design being a field that there aren't necessarily hard and fast rules, just more like generally accepted principles, that you just become a sponge for everything. And you get one comment and it stays with you forever, because it's like there's a learning moment right there. And that's part of what led me into the teaching too, is I had all of these experiences and quotes and so on from people I'd worked with that just can give so much of a foothold for people to build off of, that I just wanted to give back to an industry that had given me so much. But,
I definitely want to make sure, maybe toward the end, I want to talk about your teaching specifically, because we haven't had, Brett's done some teaching himself, but I don't think we've had anybody who's been in academia or is in academia. So I definitely want to reserve some time, because that's going to be a unique opportunity for the listeners and for the podcast to kind of talk about that some more.
Sounds great.
But before we get into that, let's hit Eternal Darkness specifically some more. Do you remember sort of some of the, because you came on after it had started, so maybe you're not, you weren't as aware of this, but do you remember some of the sort of genesis, or did you hear around the office sort of how that particular project got started and what its influences were?
Well, as you'd mentioned in your playthroughs on your previous episodes, that Lovecraft was definitely a strong influence. And when I joined the company, the game was in a prototype stage of maybe about 4 rooms. And it was funny because I walked in, and after I signed my NDA, Dennis asked someone to take me to see Ed, and I'm like, "Oh, I don't think I've met Ed before. Who's he?" And then and then they showed like, "This is Ed." It's like, oh, okay, now I get it.
Got it.
But the inception was always part of creating worlds. Dennis was always a big fan of creating worlds and universes rather than trying to create like a one-off something. He was always wanting to lay foundations for a universe that could have dozens of stories told out of it. And there's definitely a lot of maybe loose ends that were left with Eternal Darkness in terms of things like the yellow magic that I get questioned about regularly by students in particular. Yeah.
Really? That's great.
And my answer is always the same, which is that there's only a handful of people that know what the yellow magic is, and none of them are willing to come forward yet and talk about it. And they say, "Is one of them you?" I'm like, "Could be, maybe not." And they're like, "Why won't you tell us?" And I tell them, because a universe with mystery just, helps generate so many more stories, just even in the people that experience it and play it, that it's nice to have that mystery and have people coming up with their own theories and their own discussions and not feel like everything is tied up with one little bow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once you solve that riddle or answer that mystery, you need to come up with more anyway, so you want to keep them guessing. That's great that people still ask you about that. That's awesome.
It's always fun. Like they say, you always remember your first, and Eternal Darkness was my first game that I shipped. And it's great that I keep hearing about it regularly. Like when I was listening to another podcast that you had guested on, Tim, and you'd mentioned that you'd been playing Eternal Darkness for your Halloween game. You get that little kind of tingle again where it's like, awesome, I'm still relevant. And just hearing people talk about the experiences they enjoyed, whether it was the sanity effects or the lore and the story behind it and the character designs, it's hearing the things that people really pull out of an experience you've created is so rewarding. And it's something that I'm always, keeping in mind as to, don't overlook any particular part of your game as being throwaway. There's something that can be latched onto from any range of players that just speaks to them. Yeah. And, people say if you make a game for yourself or a game that you like to play, you'll at least make one person happy. But for me, it's always more about, I'm making these to share with people. I'm not making it to make me happy. We're making games for other people to enjoy. And I think that's a lot where some of that diversity came from in the character designs. And even with Alex's design, one of the big, pillars of Alex's design was to be a positive female role model as a character. She was educated, she was strong, and most importantly, she wasn't hypersexed like so many characters were in earlier days of games. We were even fighting a little bit of requests saying, can we make her a little more attractive? It's like, attractive, okay, but super sexy, no, we did not want to go that. And Nintendo really respected that decision and said, that's smart, that's good.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. To go back to something you said earlier on sort of the world building, it's something that we did touch on too. And it's great to hear that organically come up from you because, the game, where the game took place, but obviously across multiple timelines, but you just get these little slivers of those timelines. And it was so well integrated and interconnected, with all of these different timelines and characters and such, you just felt like you were scratching the surface of a universe, and I think that's probably why people both hold the game up as something that felt very fleshed out and very memorable, but also why people always wanted a sequel as well, or more games, because like you said, there's just so much unanswered, but it was so well established. Even if you guys didn't have all the answers, you felt like there were answers possible out there when you play, because it was just this little speck on, this little blip on a radar of a much bigger world, and it's great to hear that was actually a goal.
Definitely. Even
yeah, you get hints of the influence of these ancient ones on history or their agents or what have you. I mean, through the World War I and and just other things as well. I mean, there's always these kind of hints of, oh, and something else was going on here for 10 years with a particular character that you only then catch up with later, and things like that. So there really is a lot of just sort of hinting at a lot more, which I think does lend that mystery.
Well, even with the locations coming back to like the same location at multiple points in the timeline, like the cathedral, and I remember, I think Tim, it was you that caught the connection between Kareem's level and Roberto's level of coming back through the same room where Pius chose his allegiance. And definitely part of that is a resource management strategy to kind of reuse assets, but also to kind of establish that it's not just the characters who are important, but there are locations in the world that are important too. So it's like there's multiple layers to this whole adventure.
Yeah, that was on my topic list for sure. So I'm glad it kind of came up on its own. Can you talk a little bit about maybe elaborate a little bit about both of those points with the locations, both the basically what you were just saying there, but go even deeper, because I think we did talk about it quite a bit in the series, and then I think the audience would love to hear sort of what you're thinking, what your all of you folks thinking was about that, and specifically, though it's a little bit more sort of tactical, the production realities of that too, because we touched on it, but we only are talking about it from our perspective about reuse of assets and reuse of levels and stuff. But I'd love to hear specifically. We talked about sort of, when you are reusing, you all tried to find fresh ways to reuse, so you would expand areas, but you would and you'd reuse some of them, but sort of dress them up. So can you elaborate on sort of some of both the, I guess the narrative goals, but also the production goals, and how you navigated
a lot of those decisions were made before I joined the project, like in terms of writing that base storyline, and definitely having built the game once and rebuilding for the GameCube, definitely taxes a team a little bit in terms of how much work is required. But I think a big part of why we wanted that revisit is when the player goes through an environment the second time in a different timeline, there is an element of familiarity to it, even when they're approaching it from a different side or with different camera angles. And we wanted that kind of recognition to click in with the player, of almost like a deja vu, where it's like, I think I've been here before. Yeah. Some of this looks familiar. And then they'll hit one particular landmark that stands out, and they're like, yes, this is exactly the same place. And then they start to get familiar with, I think I know where I need to go next. And by doing that, it helps pull that player in as a character in the story, which was something we were also doing with the sanity effects, is trying to make the player feel that not only are the characters in the game going crazy, you're going a little bit crazy too, because you play an important part in this. So that fourth wall penetration thing was something I think we also were able to achieve through that familiarity of, like, trying to recognize an environment, whether you've been here before, and which side am I coming at it from this time, and why does it look different? It's like, oh, that's right, it's the cameras are only different. I'm doing the exact same path, but just looking at it from a slightly different perspective.
Yeah, there's also the echoes of
it's
you're talking about breaking through the fourth wall or whatever. There's echoes of that in how Alex is experiencing the stories, and then of course in the sanity effects themselves of you're experiencing sanity effects that might have something to do with your TV, which really works back in the day when more TVs were a little bit more uniform in their user interfaces.
But it was funny though, because
I definitely recall,
we would get people that admitted to getting caught by the volume sound effect,
right?
Or the volume sanity effect, when their TV doesn't look like that, and they weren't even using their TV audio; they were like putting it through their stereo. And I'm still looking for the remote, even though I know that's not what my TV looks like. And when we hear stories like that, it's like, wow, we really got people with those more than I think we even could have hoped to.
I was curious about whether those were in that original four-room Ed demo, or if they came later.
From what I recall, they came later. The original four-room kind of prototype had a character that didn't actually make the final game.
That would be de Malay, I guess.
Yeah, Joseph. So it was a completely different character, and it was more of a like an environmental puzzle type of scenario that was constructed. Find the right item, use it in the right place. So almost reminiscent of point-and-click adventure.
Oh, interesting.
But sanity effects came a little bit later, and the wonderful part about the sanity effects is that they came from all members of the team. It wasn't like, we're the designers, this is our job. It was, open it up. Anybody have an idea for a sanity effect? Let's hear it. And we really operated that way. And I'm happy that at Bedlam as well, we had the same kind of approach where you don't have to be a designer to have a good idea. Designers need to recognize what good ideas are and incorporate them in a way that fits. And I still think my favorite sanity effect out of all of them had to be the one where the controller unplugged message comes up, where you walk into a room. I don't know if you saw this one. I didn't hear it on your show, but you'll walk into a room and a bunch of zombies will come at you and start grabbing and groping and mauling at you, and the please plug in your controller message comes up. And when we were focus testing it, and I'd watch people play and see them like unplug and plug in and unplug and not know what's going on before they finally realize, I got punked.
Yeah.
I got that one back in the day. I did not get it this time, but I remember that now that you.
I did. I did get it this time. I didn't mention. I listed in my notes all of the ones that I did get, but I didn't mention them on the pod because there are just too many. Because as you know, if you did listen, I played with full, with full insanity the whole time, so I definitely got a lot more than I would usually get.
Yeah, that was a test of willpower going through, because when we would be playtesting, it's hard to resist playing it a certain way.
Yeah,
because you have to see all the different ways people might play it. But playing with low sanity was even frustrating for us sometimes, because it's like, wow, man, we've made this challenging, but we still have a lot of opportunities for you to get that sanity back if you choose to use them. But I do hear people regularly saying that, no, I wanted to see all the cool stuff. I wanted to see sanity effects, so I just let it drain.
Yeah, it was interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, they're really hooky. I mean, looking back on the game, it's definitely the strongest memory I have or had. I was kind of actually returning to the game. I was surprised, and I think we both were, at how deep some of the systems underneath, particularly the magic system, were. Looking back on it, I was glad to revisit it from that standpoint, because the sanity effects are memorable and they're hooky. They're kind of gimmicky in a sense, right? They don't impact play mostly. They come from play, but they don't necessarily impact it, other than the effect on the player, right? Yeah. I mean, so it's a great idea, but it's one of many great ideas in the game. So that's why I was kind of curious how far back it had gone.
So what?
Well, we had sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
We had a lot of great input from Nintendo. Like once they bought into second party, and we really kind of connected with them more regularly. we got a lot of great feedback that really helped improve the game. One of the things being an email we got from Shigeru Miyamoto that simply said, "You need keys that aren't keys." And we all looked at each other and said, "What? Like what is this?" And fortunately, we had a couple of people from Nintendo who had come and stayed in St. Catharines for several months to kind of be there as a point person and help us through some of the mysteries of working with Nintendo. And they said this is a classic Miyamoto feedback, almost in the line of the whole, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him to fish, you feed him his whole life. So they said he could tell you what he wants you to do, but you do it because he said so. He's trying to get you to step back, look at your game, try to figure out where he's coming from and like solve his riddle, and then you will see the problem for yourself, and that will stay with you. And it definitely did, because we looked at the game, and at the time I think we had, I don't know, 12, 15 keys or something like that. We were using that same key and lock mechanic all over the place. So one of the things that kind of fell on my shoulders when I joined the team was removing those keys. And that's where some of that connection between the chapter that Alex had just completed with her finding the next page, like the replication of the candle puzzle, using a spell that you got in the previous level to move forward and so on. That's where that came from. And that's one of the foundations of my teaching too. When I talk level design with my students, is the whole idea of, I want to see keys that aren't keys.
Yeah.
I want to see something that feels a little bit more rewarding to put together than just, if I have a key, I know what to do with it. It goes in a lock. So I just have to find the lock the key fits. And you could almost just walk around with it sticking out in front of you until you trip into a lock. But having something a little bit different is more rewarding, because the player just has to kind of think about it a little bit, piece it together. And by the time we took out most of the keys, I want to say we only had about maybe three, maybe four real keys in there. And one of them was even a red herring, which was the upstairs key that breaks in the lock.
Right.
And in that case, the actual key is the recover item spell.
Yeah.
Or restore item spell, rather, that fixes the key and allows you to open it. Because having the key itself didn't do you any good.
What a great...
Yeah, it's another way to bring the player in, right? I mean, like you said, they're involved in the logic of the world. How does this world work? They're really kind of understanding and feeling that world building in a way that's different from our own world, right? I mean, they have to learn the things that are different about this world and be able to apply them. It's sort of the pop quiz. Like, did you get what I was putting down there? To use this key.
Right. So when we create a world like this, they don't necessarily have the same rules that we're used to in our own world. So, finding a way to bridge that gap and kind of teach the player to navigate through the mysteries, the unknown, the magics, and so on is really important.
Yeah, it's funny. That's exactly where I was going to go with the topics. I wanted to kind of hit some of the Nintendo stuff, so that came up on its own. Thank you, Brad.
No problem.
And that anecdote is amazing to me. I was just grinning ear to ear when you said it, because I believe we talked about it on the series as well. But it is a game of locks and keys. But the fact that you got that feedback and that you did take a step back and really redefine what keys were. So with the pages being sort of narrative centric, but then the one that I really always loved about the game is the use of the magic system as keys, because the magic system is so tightly wound and I think pretty elegant. And then to have it also become not just used in combat or other areas, but also to be that lock and key was a great integration of teaching the player and onboarding the player through the system with those hard stops. Can you elaborate at all on sort of, I guess I'll say, the usability and playtesting of that? You mentioned you didn't really have a QA department. Was it just endless replaying for you guys to make sure that you found fair ways to teach the player and that they didn't get stuck on things? Or How difficult was that to really, troubleshoot the usability of those locks and keys? Because those can really be wall moments for people, right, where they get stuck.
Yeah, fortunately, we did get a lot of feedback from Nintendo as well towards the end of the project. So in the beginning, it was just a lot of running it by each other, running it through people in various departments on the team. But later on, we got access to Nintendo's QA department.
Okay,
and those guys, wow, they really know how to find weird stuff. They found we got a bug report from Nintendo. This is a story I love sharing with my students because they have the same initial reaction we did. They sent us a report that during the attract mode cinematic, like outside of gameplay, there was one particular moment where if you opened up the GameCube door on the top and then closed it and open and close it, open, close, open, like really, really quickly, the game crashes. And we're like, well, I'm sure it does. Like that's a PEBCAC error, right? Problem exists between console and couch. Doctor, it hurts when I do this, then don't do that. But they weren't accepting of us saying, well, someone should expect there to be a problem if they do that. We had to track it down and find it because their logic was, this isn't the problem. This is just a way to kind of expose the symptoms. So this could be, part of a bigger problem. This is just a way that we can make it happen on demand. Right. And when we thought about it from that perspective, it's like, okay, who don't we like on the code team that we can hand this to for a couple of weeks because no one wanted to look at it. I can't.
Oh man, I can just imagine getting that.
Yeah,
bug.
That's Brett in this case. Yeah.
I just can't remember if someone volunteered to take it or if someone was voluntold, but they wound up tracking it down and finding what the problem was, and they're like, it's gone, and it was. In fact, a symptom of a bigger issue that in solving the one that we found this way, it kind of made another handful of bugs just automatically disappear.
Wow. That's, yeah. I mean, not that I was that good of a tester, but I was the one sending those bugs to the developers because I started in QA myself. So I had some similar turn on and off something very quickly to create a problem where Brett or somebody would come back and say, well, don't do that. Well, we're not closing the bugs, so you got to figure it out. So what are some other sort of interactions now that we're on the Nintendo topic? Like, what was the back and forth like? Was it just the bug reports and the occasional mysterious, riddles from Miyamoto, or how was the, and you mentioned there were some people on site with you. Were those Nintendo of America people, or were those from Japan, or what was that structure like?
Yeah, they came over from Japan,
wow.
And we had a translator on staff to make sure that we could communicate well, and it was regular feedback. We would have design meetings with them. They would play the game, look at some things that maybe they were questioning whether they would be too difficult or whether we were creating QA nightmares of things that would take forever to try testing all the possible combinations. And some of them didn't always go maybe the way that we had hoped. And, maybe we look back and say, yeah, I wish we didn't make that change. But for the most part, the game definitely improved with their feedback. And so some of it was things like I'm sorry, I'm just losing it here for a second.
No, that's all right.
One of the big things that they were concerned about was we originally had an economy of those various health meters that the player has, whether it's the physical health, the magical health, and the sanity health. And the recover spell was originally planned to kind of be like a sacrifice type of thing. So if you wanted to recover magic, it would cost you some sanity. If you wanted to recover some sanity, it would cost you physical health. And if you wanted to recover physical health, it would just drain your magic. So you had to, it would be harder to play the game with no sanity because, you would need that to maybe recover some magic. And they had concerns that was going to be a little too micromanaging, a little bit too much juggling that the player might not expect to have to do in a game like this. Yeah. And that's where the recovery of magic as you move came into play, where the magic just slowly recovers as long as you're staying in motion. And like we would look back at it and say, oh, I don't like how that works because we had this really cool system, but in the end,
yeah, it's thematically appropriate, right? I mean, it makes sense given all the other kind of circles of those three colors in the game. Like, I get how you got there.
Totally.
And in the end, I think it definitely made the game maybe a little more approachable for people, that they can focus more on playing and less on resource management. You still have the regrets, but we learned so much from them. It's hard to be critical of recommendations they make. Even if they don't necessarily align with what you'd like to do, they always have the best intentions, and they've got so much experience to draw from that. It was a fantastic working relationship for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'll defend it because I think having the magic renew in that way allows for more experimentation, which is good, and it also allows you to be able to play with a wider variety of styles, like as Tim did, right? So, because as you point out, otherwise you're kind of stuck. Like you kind of have to kill all the enemies or whatever to get your sanity back and things like that. So, I mean, I can see it either way because, like I said, I totally get how you got there. I can see it. I mean, I have things from our own games that I look back and I'm like, man, I wish we'd be able to keep whatever this level that way, but had to tone it down because it was too difficult you had to be an expert player or whatever to get past it. And now I look at those games and think, I'm glad we did that because I wouldn't be able to play them now. Because
it's really easy to look back and see the flaws in your own work. Like we're definitely our own worst critics. Like the one thing that I look back on Eternal Darkness and just kind of regret a little bit is that we didn't make better use of the body part targeting, because we had that system in, and there were some planned strategies in there. Like if you cut the arms off of Chaturga zombie, the big red ones, they can't do any damage to you for a bit, so it buys you some more time. Chopping off limbs on the Uliauth zombies, the blue ones, puts them into the singing. When you weaken them, they get into that chanting, which I was glad to hear that you'd encountered, because a lot of people I've talked to that have played the game never encountered it, because a strategy kind of wound up emerging totally unintentionally that attacking the head is almost always the best way to go. And people were killing things so quickly, they were missing out on that chanting and singing mechanic. And I thought it would have been okay if we maybe designed some of those characters a little bit differently, so the head was attached to the hip or something to make you use those different angles a little more, rather than just hold up and attack. But
I mean, that's Dead Space kind of stuff, right? Where Dead Space started to really, I think, I don't know, maybe they were even influenced by you, but they were definitely leveraging that putting heads or the concept of that, making limbs more important for how to succeed. Yeah, bucking the trend of the head being always the focus. Yeah, that's a good takeaway.
Yeah, I also thought it was really, it was just genuinely cool that they had different sorts of attacks like that, and the thought that they kind of all worked together and did massive amounts of damage if you didn't get to them quickly was it's definitely worked out really well. I quite enjoyed discovering that.
Was the magic system something that you did work on, or were you involved with that?
I didn't work on the magic system. No, that was well in place. Probably the biggest change I think that came to the magic system after I joined in was the naming of the power rune to Pargon. That was the big change, because the original name we had for it apparently was a little bit close to let's say a certain anatomical reference in Japanese. And I won't name it because I don't want people looking it up. But they said, yeah, we can't call it that. And we're like, why not? This is why. And we're like, well, it is still kind of power. And they're like, no. So like, yes, I get it. Yeah, we will change it. But that always became the story, is people would throw the old name around every now and then, is like when they're yelling at people. And it's like,
right. How funny. Yeah. We talked a fair amount about the magic system specifically, and the sentence, structure, and it's very interesting, and not really, there hasn't been a lot of examples of people riffing off of it. I feel like even since, there's been maybe a few, but I've always loved the system, and I love sort of creating those spells yourself in that way, and I wish more people would do it, because I think it was a really neat design. The other category that we started to touch on a little bit with world structure, but I kind of wanted to ask about the multiple, the choice that Pius makes, and the what that does to the game production and structure of the game, because you now have 3 different paths you can take with 3 different endings and 3 different, enemy type, boss type, structure. So how did that go for you and the team, and what was that like to develop, a game where I guess replayability was probably the focus.
I was gonna ask too, like, do you think of it as a game that you play, that playing through 4 times is part of the game? Like, that's the expected play or not? I guess would be my question as well.
I don't think it would be fair to say it's the expected play, given how few people finish a game once they start across the board, like finishing it a first time. I keep hearing the general stat of about 25% of people finish a game once they start it, which I was hearing that back when we were developing Eternal Darkness, and I still hear it today. Which is kind of surprising. It hasn't gone down, given how we have that phenomenon of backlog now that we never had 20, 30 years ago. But I don't think we really expected that people would play it multiple times, but we hoped that they would. We hoped that they would see that there is a more fundamental difference than just, I'm fighting different enemies this time. I'm fighting more of a certain color, but that it does kind of play a little bit differently in terms of strategy to a certain extent, where when you are being attacked and your sanity is being drained more heavily, it changes your strategy a bit. And if your magic is being drained more heavily, how does that change your gameplay? But I don't think we got a lot of people that really saw that change, because they'd start to play and things would feel a little bit different, but they didn't really get far enough to appreciate how at higher levels, being or further on in the game, having less sanity is a little bit more difficult to manage than my first playthrough, where my life was low, but I was able to really easily recover my health. So
too subtle, you're saying, sort of overall for people.
And some of that was a change that happened along the way, where the paths were a little bit more consolidated, or less diverse from one playthrough to the next, as a manner of managing scope. Just because having 3 very completely different feeling playthroughs, again, that's where it works for us, but getting a team to go through and try it all these different times, and on subsequent playthroughs, playing them in different orders was just a little bit out of hand. So that was reined in quite a bit, and maybe didn't allow people to see as easily that there's a difference from one playthrough to the next, even though there is a difference.
Yeah. No, I think there's some good lessons in there. There is definitely, especially these days because of production realities being what they are. It's definitely not a common thing you see, and that's why it was definitely worth discussing on the podcast, because it was such a unique decision and commitment, that it's often, unfortunately, sometimes those potentially cool ideas get cut because of production realities and the fact that you stuck with it. Even despite the subtlety, it's still something to be mentioned. And it's good to hear that there were lessons and kind of reflections that you all had about, how it went. Well, I want to reserve, we're coming up on our times potentially, but I definitely want to reserve time to talk about your work in academia, because like I said earlier, we don't have, we haven't had anybody on specifically, and you've been doing it for a while and in multiple places. And by the way, I really appreciate your earlier comments about giving back to the community and to this art form that you've definitely blood, sweat, and tears for, it sounds like. So what has that been like, and how did you get into teaching, and how have you found it?
I got into it partly from actually my days at Bedlam. I did a guest spot, like a guest lecture at George Brown College. It was, I think I'd been with the company for about 2 weeks, and they said, "Yeah, we need you to go talk at this college for us and represent our studio." I said, "But I've been here for 2 weeks." They said, "Well, one of the other guys was going to do it, but he gets stage fright, so you're up." I said, "Okay, here we go." And that was where I made my first contact. And then after Bedlam had closed, I went back to school for a year, and then my wife actually found a job posting for teaching, and she said, "I'll bet you could do that." And I said, "I think you're right." And it turned out that my contact I had made was still there and sort of remembered me, but also had close contacts with my old CEO, Trevor Fencott, and a couple of the other guys that I had worked with, one of which was also teaching with him. So there was a good, "Hey, is this guy for real? Is he good? Do you think he'd be a good professor?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So went in and then just kind of fell into it gradually, and then basically made it my primary gig. And it's awesome too, not just because I get to give back and I get to kind of still be involved in game development, but I get to see all these different ideas every semester that another group of students has, and seeing their take on things and how their perception as basically a completely different generation of player is different from my own, and still get my hands dirty and get involved in there, but not having to crunch is really nice too. That's their job, not mine.
There you go. Yeah. It's my education is in theater, so I don't have the same experience from a game perspective. So I haven't had that perspective, but I can't imagine the kinds of theater that would come through university, through academia, and what we as students were experimenting in, because we had the freedom to, right? It wasn't a business yet, right? You didn't have to make a living at it. So you had a lot more freedom. And I can only imagine, students, allowing that freedom to happen via university. And like I said, Brett's probably experienced this himself as well, so he can speak to it too. But I can only imagine how, exciting and fulfilling that is, because, in studios, we are often, put so many boundaries are put around us on what we can really even, from an ideas perspective, even consider, and with no boundaries or very little boundaries, just sort of like what you want to get out of the program. That's got to be really exciting.
Yeah, it challenges your orthodoxy, I think, in some ways, right? Because you've got some lessons you've learned, and you sort of think about things a certain way, and that's happenstance of your own environment kind of coming up, I think, often. So it is it's always interesting from that standpoint.
Sorry.
So it sounds like it's been
it's really fulfilling when you see students move on and start working in studios and working on titles and even starting their own studios. I had one group of students that really clicked well together, and they had a project that started as a game jam and really had something that looked like it was marketable. And they were like, well, I kind of want to do these other ideas. And we pushed them a bit saying, trust us, this has potential. Like, work on this, build this out. And so they did. They listened to us. They kept working on it. They won an award at a student game competition with it. And then they pitched it to the big three console manufacturers, and Nintendo wound up publishing their game. And that was a game called Runbow by 13am Games, which was a 9-player competitive kind of runner brawler, where as the background color would change, platforms would blend into the background and effectively disappear. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I've heard of this. Yeah.
And that launched their studio. And I think they're working on their third title now, and they've ported Runbow to multiple machines. So when you see something like that, where it's not just, hey, I got a job with a big studio, but they had the confidence to break out on their own as an independent studio and make a go at it. It's so satisfying.
Yeah. I can only imagine. Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great story too. Well, Brad, thank you so much for coming on your birthday.
Yes, indeed. Happy birthday. It's been
yeah, we got the present apparently for having you on, and some great anecdotes. And Eternal Darkness is a gem, and I'm glad that we were able to have you on, and that you still hear about it, because I think it's a game that I think you should be very proud of being a part of, because for me specifically, I just have always, it's been one of my favorites, and I was really happy we could return to it.
Thank
I just think it's a gem. So thanks for coming on, and thanks for giving us a perspective.
It's been a pleasure, guys. It's as you guys know, being in the industry yourselves, that it's really easy to talk about the things that you really enjoy, and any kind of different people you get a chance to kind of compare notes with and share experiences with is not just fun and enjoyable to just take part in, but you always take something away from that too. Whether it's something that they found in their experience that they clued in on that you didn't think people would notice, or just having a completely different take on what they played that you hadn't anticipated. There's always something that you can pull out of a talk about games and carry it forward.
Yep. I bet you're a pretty good instructor. So
I'll be sure to forward this link to your podcast to my boss, so that you can hear how good I am.
Exactly. Listen up, boss. Yeah. It's true. Give Brad a raise or something.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking a little time today, Brad. We really appreciate it.
Anytime, guys.
From the break. I hope you've had some appropriately man-bowl shaped cake or something to celebrate the day. A big day for you, I know. For all fans of World of Warcraft, which we'll get back to next week. But that was a great interview. I picked up on a lot of stuff that we didn't have time to kind of circle around to, but talking about they've talked about it before. It's come up elsewise, and Brad just referred to it. But the removal of that Joseph de Molay character, I don't know if you know this. Do you know anything?
No, I don't know about it.
Oh, okay. So that was so as you know, ED came out in 2002, and we also had a game that came out in 2002 that had to be changed a little bit in light of world events, specifically 9/11.
Yeah.
And Joseph de Molay was, I believe, a descendant or maybe a brother. I don't remember the specifics, but is related to Jacques de Molay, who was a crusader. And they felt it was insensitive to refer to the Crusades at a time where we were, invading, in the Middle East and such, and in Afghanistan. So it was not a good time to be invoking the Crusades. We had changed the story of Jedi Starfighter because we literally had things that were not dissimilar from planes being thrown into buildings. So we had our own things to change around to change our story as a result of that as well. So I definitely remember that impacting us, and reading that about de Molay, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. Because I think that was even maybe invoked as a crusade at the time. I feel like Bush made a gaffe along those lines back then. It was just not a good time.
Not surprising. Yeah, right. Anyway, another thing I loved was he said designers need to recognize what is a good idea and find a way to incorporate it. And I was like, damn right, Tim needs to do that. Now, wait a second. That is exactly my philosophy too. I was nodding the whole time.
And then you threw me under the bus, like I'd be the person to send back a bug. Come on.
Well, what am I? That's exactly what we're supposed to do in this podcast. We have our roles to play.
I see how it is. But no, that was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was good. And I was actually really I hadn't thought about it until I started kind of getting into his intro. I think it's really good that we have somebody on who's, he's consulting and freelancing, but he's also teaching, and that's a whole segment that we really haven't talked about very much, even though I know you have, you've done it yourself, but so that was a good bonus.
Absolutely. I love that you incorporated it. Yeah. And a birthday cast. He was able to incorporate, just kind of naturally say, oh yeah, I talked to my students about this or that, the lessons he takes away, which is sort of what we're doing here, right? When we look back at games and like the things that we take away might be things that we would teach if we taught these specific games or something like that. But and often that's kind of the topic of our conversation. But it's definitely interesting to hear somebody who worked on them literally say, "Oh yeah, I take this away and talk to my students about it."
Yeah,
fantastic. Perfect. Yeah, really, really great. So we thank Brad again for taking some time out on his birthday to talk with these two knuckleheads. Oh,
and a quick shout out to DLC, which is a podcast that I love and I've mentioned a few times. Brad was he's a listener of DLC.
Yes,
Jeff Kanata and Christian Spicer, and so he heard me on that podcast talking about Eternal Darkness before I contacted him. So he already knew we had, you know what I mean? He had put two and two together. And so it was kind of a nice coincidence that when I reached out. So I'm glad he could do it, even sacrifice some of his birthday to do it. So
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely great. And a wonderful interview. We're going to turn and do a little bit of feedback before we get back to WoW next week. Reminder for folks playing along, we're playing to level 20, I think we said. That actually might be ambitious. I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out there. So, yeah, I'm just going to tell you that as well, sir, knowing your time and some constraints. I'll let you guide as far as that goes, and you let me know.
Yeah.
But it definitely, I think the experience ramp gets a lot slower after that. We already noticed it going from like 5 to 10. We didn't go to 10, but going from 5 up, how much it's like, oh, it's 45 minutes and then it's several hours to get the next few levels. And I think it gets even longer. So yeah, you let me know and I'll throw it out on Twitter. It is a holiday for us, so maybe we'll have more time, but there's also family getting fit in and all that stuff. So
yeah. We'll figure it out.
We'll see how that
goes. How far we can get. We didn't quite make it to 10 anyway in the first one, so yeah, we can adapt a little bit.
Yep, absolutely. But I still fully expect to have 3 or 4 characters up to whatever level we determine.
Yeah, of course.
Let's turn now to email. You have one here from Alin O or Alin.
Alin. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, from Alin or Alin, Tim Brett, longtime listener, first time writing. I join what sounds like, based on some of your other write-ins, a handful of others who pair hobbyist game development work with your podcast for background listening and greatly appreciate the content of your playthrough discussions and interviews. Thanks for all the engrossing content over the last 3 years. I don't know if or how it would fit into your schedules or whether the logistics of a pro-quality fan translation meet the criteria you set out for yourselves, but I wanted to let you know I'd love to hear your collective thoughts on FromSoft's Shadow Tower Abyss on PS2. Nestled in the years between Metroid Prime and Half-Life 2, it fits in a unique space between the modern FPS formula before the modern FPS formula was codified and makes for a fantastic offbeat experience, logistically bridging the gap between Kingsfield and the contemporary Soulsborne games. It's relatively short. It's a relatively short game with a number of interesting mechanical and exploratory beats I'd enjoy your analysis of, and would welcome the context you usually bring to your general criticism by locating particular work among popular development trends at the time of release. Your interviews are always especially excellent, and though I imagine it's much harder to find appropriate candidates from your personal and professional pool of connections for certain types of games you play for the podcast, I hope you produce more in the future. All the best, Aylin.
I wanted... Yeah, go ahead.
No, I've heard of Kingsfield, but I didn't know about that one for sure.
Yeah, no, I thought we might talk, excuse me, a little bit about fan work. I'm not sure we will find time to play this game in particular, and I apologize for that. And we don't normally, I'm actually going to read an email myself, which is about, you should play this game. I'm not sure we'll fit this one in because I don't think either one of us have played enough of FromSoft's games, right, to be able to even set it in that tradition, never mind against games as a whole. But I actually was glad to read this just from the standpoint of, so here's a game that I've never heard of, and as you mentioned, you haven't either, and it being a FPS, on the PS2 also makes it in kind of fairly small category. There's not tons of those. So I'm gonna look it up. But the
fan translation is what you were.
The fan translation is the thing I kind of keyed on because I think fans keep alive these sorts of things and bring them, to different audiences. I know we mentioned Patrick Klepek off mic. He's somebody who just recently reported on a game that in 24 hours had both come out with a fan translation and then disappeared again because of infighting inside its community. But sometimes they turn out really well. So anyway, I don't know. I thought it was interesting to hear that because there's a game we've lamented many times. In fact, we lamented a little bit with Brad about how companies, again off mic, don't really do a good job of archiving their games or representing them or making them available to audiences going forward. And this is, I think, is probably one of those cases where fans have taken up the mantle. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, there's fans of most things, out there, and especially if they're inaccessible or few and far between, offbeat, whatever, the people will keep them alive, including myself as a fan. There's sometimes, that I will sing something's praises for something that people may not know about, just because I'm a fan. So I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I'm going to look this up too, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if not for a fan translation of this, I mean, there are people I think who would love to be, a game like Dark Souls might get its hooks into you, and then you just want to know everything about that studio, whether for professional reasons, because, you might want to see that, or archival reasons, or just purely of, I will occasionally come across a novelist I haven't read before and read their latest thing and go, oh, I now have to read everything by this person. Because it just connects with you in some way. And it's great that there are people out there doing the good work to make that available, both to modern audiences or to people who don't speak the original language. And that can be a real challenge, technically as well, because I gathered this particular one that was reported on Vice, I'll put a link in the show notes, was especially difficult to deal with because the underlying code was pretty difficult to pull apart as fairly spaghetti-like, which sometimes happens. There's a lot here to unpack. We've talked about emulation in the past as well, and so that's another case where basically fans are basically making it possible for these games to exist in the future when the companies don't. So a lot to kind of touch on there.
Also, the name of the game that they mention has tower and abyss in the name. So
and shadow.
Shadow. So how can you go wrong with something that's both a tower and an abyss?
Yep, that's true. That's good. Well, then maybe the tower and then its shadow is the abyss. I don't.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I feel you.
That would work in a sort of Eternal Darkness sort of way.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I've got one here from Owen, and it's rare that we do this twice in one episode. We don't normally read the mails on the air about games we'd like you to play, that fans would like us to play, but we're reading 2 in a row here. So anyway, it's thanks and a request from Owen. I wanted to write a quick note of thanks for the Dev Game Club podcast. After 7 years as a mobile game dev, I moved out of the games industry a couple of years ago. While that move ended up overall being a good life decision, I found there was part of me that missed working in games. I discovered your podcast a few months ago and have found it perfect for scratching that slight itch. The fact that the back catalog included a number of seminal games from my childhood, TIE Fighter, XCOM, Dark Forces, Planescape Torment, etc., was icing on the cake. Which brings me to my request. I haven't been listening long enough to get a good sense of whether or not you accept suggestions for games to play for the club, but I'm going to give it a try by requesting Star Control 2. This game, more than any other, captured my interest as a kid and inspired me to want to make games. It was the first game I'd experienced with truly nonlinear gameplay. I've beaten it multiple times, and each time was different. And that felt like it had a living universe where events were taking place that weren't just reacting to the player. Looking back at it now, I expect much of that nonlinear area was effectively just optional side quests and the living universe feeling scripting triggered by the in-game clock. Still, it felt to me like nothing else from that era, and I think it would be fascinating to hear the two of you direct it. Plus, there's freely available fan port to modern hardware, so there's another tie-in to the last mail. And the lawsuit between the original creators and Stardock was settled earlier this year, so hopefully no awkwardness there. Cheers, Owen. Yeah, so that's a game that you and I have talked a little bit off air as maybe a thing that we will play, because but sometimes we don't. We often don't read them on the air just because we get a number of them. This is a game in particular neither of us have played as well. So there's another connection with the previous.
But always heard about.
Yeah, but always heard about.
Yeah. It is considered, classic.
As far as tying in, we often try to tie in the games we play with something specific happening. And with a new Star Control game in the future, that might be something we look at then.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yeah.
So, normally we try to tie in the games we choose based on current events, normally in games, but sometimes a Star Wars movie, for example, although now that they're doing them basically every year, we're not going to be doing that. There's too many Star Wars movies and not enough great Star Wars games, in my opinion. Although apparently a good one came out this week. So anyway, there's another email along those lines, but keep sending those in. I actually wanted to also key off that as well to say, yes, I have a list. I have a separate folder in Gmail, which is people arguing passionately for the games they think we should play. And I refer to it from time to time when we're thinking about what's next. So, all right, why don't you hit another one? And then I have a very short one after that.
Okay.
I don't. I have a long one after that. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Go.
Subject Q regarding playtesting from Lucas Rizzoli. Brett and Tim, glad to hear you again after a brief break, and glad also that Tim as well. Thank you, Lucas. Don't know if you will take questions for Romero and or if you're keen to answer this yourselves, but I'm curious what your attitudes are regarding playtesting and what it helps with and what it does not, when and what kind, etc. and how these attitudes may have changed in your years working in games. The term playtesting can cover a lot of things, but perhaps you can also tell us how you understand and use it, like with combo. I see. He's trolling us. Okay. Thanks again for the cast, Lucas Rizzoli. Thank you, Lucas.
I probably should have been the one to read this because I feel like you're the one who has the bigger answer because you've always been the advocate for different types of playtesting. So I'm going to mostly sit back and let you answer.
Okay. Wasn't sure where you're going. If you had like your big answer coming, but you have plenty to say about this too. But yeah, playtesting he's right. It does take on different definitions per studio and per individual, and it hasn't been codified, I think, as much as it should. To be honest, one of the reasons I actually went to Microsoft, to be honest, was, even though I said to be honest too many times in a row, was actually to work with their usability lab, which is sort of legendary. And has been for many, many years. In fact, we used it. We were able to use it way back on Republic Commando. Even they offered it to us because we were an Xbox game. So, and I met some people that way. But we actually talked about it a little bit with Brad in the interview today, where they didn't really have much of a QA department. The team itself was sort of doing its own sort of playtesting, and playtesting is the way that, I do use Microsoft's terms to some degree because they've been very scientific over the years about how to define this stuff. But usability specifically, is sort of different than playtesting. And a lot of times people confuse or combine those two things up. Even sometimes I'll throw them around a little willy-nilly and need to catch myself. But playtesting is often a really important phase of a project where it's not QA. It's not where you have the testers going in and playing the game over and over again because they have a very specifically different role to play on a development team. Playtesting for me has always been getting those blind testers who could be friends, could be family, could be strangers off the street. Sometimes teams will hire agencies to recruit people from the street to come in and play and then do reports. There's whole companies devoted to this that you can hire. And the really important part of that is you're getting that blind feedback. You're getting somebody who comes in and has not tested the game in the QA department, has not hopefully even developed games, but may be a player. But sometimes the segments that you're looking for may be non-players. And so often you kind of come at it with, okay, what kinds of playtesters do you want? You work with the agency or with your own internal department to define the segments you're going for, and then you go and recruit for that. And then you come in and you film them, you watch them, you don't handhold them, you don't talk to them during the time, you let them struggle, you watch them and see where they struggle. You record them, you record their hands, you record their eyes. And so you kind of get the whole kit and caboodle to really understand what they're going through to make the game better. So it's very much not QA. And then usability on the other side is almost more of the deep dive into how usable your game is from an interface perspective. And I don't mean the user interface, but just interfacing generally with the game. And so there's scientists who just focus on just that, say at Microsoft or what have you. So they're very closely related, but they're different. And playtesting is very much, sometimes people will throw out playtesting, like the development team is playtesting the game today, and we're getting it, getting information from the team. Sort of that's playtesting in my book, but for me, playtesting is an even more pure definition than that. So that's my rambling on that. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely would echo a lot of what you had to say. I definitely remember bringing in people who weren't on the team, or as people joined the team, in particular on Republic Commando, and having to play a level, sitting with them and having the experience of not saying anything, sitting there with a notepad and them trying to talk about how they're experiencing the game. It's sort of like watching somebody do a let's play or whatever of your game, or stream it or something like that, only before it comes out, right? Which is when the feedback can actually be helpful for most games, or for most single player games, or what have you. So we definitely did a lot of that. It's also something to sort of echo, having talked with a teacher today, a professor of games, is something that we did and modeled when I taught. We actually had students learn from us feedback on how, or learn from us how to basically play test your game, because we wanted them to they were making twine games, and we wanted them to take them to a certain point and then start getting feedback and, explaining, it's really important for people who don't know your game to play your game. So they can tell you what they're feeling or why they want to make a certain choice over another one or what have you, in a fairly low barrier to entry game, even in that case. And so my friend Michael Abbott, the other professor, played a twine game that I had done some of, had not finished, and just was giving me feedback that I held on to. I still have, for this little twine game I had made. And it's super valuable. I mean, to see someone and see what they get stuck on and notice oh, that's a bug, but not be able to say that's a bug, because, they're saying what they're experiencing and you're just letting that happen. Yeah. Those are some thoughts I kind of have off the cuff of how I would use it.
Brett added an important part that I forgot too, and that it is really important to have your playtesters vocalize what their experiences are, because most people, when anyone plays a game, they're not talking about, they're just playing it, and so it's hard to convince people to speak out loud about what they're feeling. But you need that kind of extra information to really assess, both watching what they're doing, but also what they're thinking about it. And I do remember, I think you were kind of alluding to this when you brought the topic up when we first started talking about it here. Early in LucasArts days, when we were both there, there was resistance to the idea of playtesting in as a formal thing. We would have, I think we've referred to pizza orgies and stuff in the past where you'd have other teams come in and play your game for the exact same reason, for playtesting. But that would be 1 or 2 nights at most, and very kind of informal. And I and others were always advocating to really have a playtesting and usability lab internally that we would actually leverage like Microsoft did. But obviously it's expensive to do that. But I was always surprised at how much resistance I would get to that concept, because to be honest, back then, and this still is a problem, I think, to some degree, though less so, there's a bit of, I guess, kind of ego about it that, you're working on and making your game, and what it needs. You think a lot of developers think they know what it needs and think that testing it themselves and using the QA department is enough, and that's all you really need. But they're, that definitely is not true in my opinion.
Yeah,
and
they're wrong.
It ends up biting you.
Yeah.
They're wrong. And I think there's plenty of examples, in games that have faltered or failed or had, rough spots where you can point to lack of playtesting. And Valve is notoriously one of those studios, Nintendo as well, that, the cornerstone of their whole, development cycle is playtesting. So.
Yeah, and in particular, you mentioned, and having had Miyamoto's name invoked earlier on the episode, made me think of they're a company that explicitly brings in people from non-development departments to play the games.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have somebody from the finance department or marketing or what have you come in, and play the game and give feedback at different points.
Blizzard as well. Yeah, Blizzard's notorious for that. It's a good topic.
Absolutely. We probably spend an episode just on that. But I can totally remember back when you had, Pinecone come over and play a level for the first time, on Republic Commando and give his feedback. And he was, I think one of the things that happened at LEC is that we had formed that group, LEC Games, that would discuss games, not our own games, but, games that were kind of in the public eye, games that had just come out or whatever, and talk about the important ones and what was good about them, what have you. And I think that kind of primed the pump to do a grassroots kind of approach to those sorts of things, that people were already comfortable talking about games they were playing. Because so often we would have those meetings would start with somebody playing some of the game to present it, and they would talk through what they were experiencing as they were playing the game. Not a game that we had made, not a game development, but just, whatever game it happened to be. So
game theory group.
Game theory. That's what I meant. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Yeah.
So
those are the days.
Those were the days when that was such a radical idea. Anyway, yeah, it's a little different from focus testing, I guess. So, which is another thing.
Oh yeah, I didn't even cover that. That's another sort of confused term. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, all right, I'm going to take the last one here. This is from Zachary Crownover, who we've heard from before. He says, the subject is players don't read or do so poorly, parenthetically. Hi, Brett and Tim. Hearing Brett mention his having gotten stuck on the Peter Jacob chapter's Trapper puzzle reminded me of my own hurdle with that section. Well, I was able to glean relatively quickly that I was meant to send a trapper through a small hole in the wall, and while once I did so, I immediately presumed I was supposed to teleport the cadaver blocking the doorway. I failed to do so for the next 45 minutes or so, all because I made the fatal flaw of paying more attention to what the game was showing me than what it was telling me. When you first send your trapper through the hole in question, you're met with a text box which details what that you're to target an enemy or object to flag it for teleportation prior to actually teleporting it. This would normally be all well and good, but I just spent the previous handful of hours interacting with trappers, so of course I was aware that since the effect which accompanies their teleportation ability is a circular one, which radiates from the center outward, it's an area of effect attack, which requires no targeting at all, right? Wrong. A trapper's teleportation ability is capable of affecting only those objects within its radius, but those objects have to be targeted nonetheless if they're to suffer any consequence. In short, oft reasonable assumptions fueled by my years of playing games blinded me to what I was being explicitly told. When all else fails, it would seem maybe listening is indeed a viable alternative to watching. Glad to hear all's well with Tim and looking forward to the next episode. Cheers, Zachary Crownover. That's a good one.
It's very well put. I did not see any pop-up. I don't remember a pop-up for that.
There was when you learn this, when you first cast the spell and become a trapper, it tells you.
Oh, okay. I was sorry.
So, and that actually for you didn't happen there.
No,
because you tried to get into that earlier, and that's that earlier level you had tried to do it. Yeah. It's like the first time you cast the spell, it'll tell you what you can do with that creature, and that's the last time it tells you, which is that's a usability flaw right there. But
well, I had the other issue too that I think I mentioned where I didn't understand why I was not able to be a trapper for more than a second or two.
Right.
Remember,
yes, sanity problem. Yeah.
I eventually found that out. I might have been the manual. I forget how I even found. I might have had to look that up, to be honest, because it ended up being critical path. But yeah, because I had no insanity, which they didn't expect anyone to play that way, I guess.
Right.
As Brad mentioned, I couldn't be a trapper for more than a couple seconds. So I was like, what am I doing wrong? That's a good point. That is the example of both playtesting and usability lab would help that. And as Brett just said, usability wise, you have a design and a usability education system in conflict with each other. They're kind of basically sending the wrong signals psychologically to the player, opposite signals essentially. Like he said, every signal you get from the trappers up to that point is an AoE, and then it's not the case. And that stumped me. I think it stumped all three of us.
Because then I had forgotten about that by the time I got to that black monolith thing, that obelisk, whatever it is that you have to move later in the game.
Right.
And I had the same problem there, and I was streaming it, and somebody said you have to target it. I was like, oh, that's right. Forgot.
Yeah. It was a key that wasn't a key.
Yeah, exactly. Another key that wasn't a key. Yeah, for sure. Anyway, thank you, Zachary. I actually have one that's super short, and that will catch us up for good. So this one is Mind Blown from Johnny Pockets. He says, good day, gentlemen. I am a software developer, and my mind has been blown. I listened to the John Romero interview, and then I listened to it again. Wow. Cheers, Johnny Pockets. So,
yeah, that's
another
awesome.
shout out to John. But yes, having listened to it twice myself, once when we recorded it, another one when I produced it. It's quite an interview. He's something else. So
yeah, that was a treat. Man, we've been very lucky with our interviews lately. So
we really have. They've been good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sir, that is it for us this week. To our American listeners, happy Thanksgiving this week. I hope you have lots of enjoyable turkey or tofurkey or turducken or whatever meets your fancy. In all cases, I hope there's pie. And
Amen.
Yes, I'm looking forward to cooking a couple pies myself. I really think of Thanksgiving as a vector for two things. One is pie and the other is leftovers. So I'm looking forward to this coming week. Yes, I make a lot of turkey tetrazzini after the meal. I get more turkey than I can reasonably eat, just so that I can make multiple platters of turkey tetrazzini afterwards. So that's my plan. That's how I work. Anyway, to those folks, enjoy. To the rest of you, have a good week. You can find the podcast online at www.devgameclub.com, where I put the show notes, or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
I am going to head down and stream some Persona 5 this afternoon on my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/Brett Duville. Yes, I just started that this week, and it's it's a thing. It's JRPG-licious, but it's also got the UI is something else.
I've always heard, never dabbled.
Yeah, it's particularly. I mean, the fifth one is particularly good. The other ones are fine, but this one's just like stylish as all get out. A lot of great transitions and stuff. Anyway, you can find me playing that on weeknights. On weekends, I'm usually playing whatever we're playing for the cast. And as we said, we're going to be doing some World of Warcraft, so I'll be doing a little bit of that as well. Thanks so much for joining us. Have fun playing games this week, and happy birthday.
Happy birthday.